Hey guys, it's Bellamy here from Midnight Suns, and today we have another tier list. And this time we are going to be ranking the Star Wars shows. So this includes the animated shows and the live action shows, movies and TV shows. Yeah, so we'll be ranking all of that. And without further ado, let's start with the tier list. Alright, so we'll start with the movies first, and then we'll move on to the TV shows. And of course, we have to begin with 1977's Star Wars. And this was, when it first came out, it wasn't called A New Hope, it was just Star Wars. And this is the one that started all of it. I know a lot of people say that The Empire Strikes Back is the best in the original trilogy, but for me, I actually love the original first Star Wars the most of the original trilogy. And I'm gonna have to put it on the A rank. I have the high ground.
I have the high ground!
This movie definitely has a high ground. It started everything. Without this first movie, we wouldn't have all of this. Without this first movie, filmmaking as we know it right now wouldn't be in the same state as we know it. Like, George Lucas is the one that even made our whole non-linear video editing possible. So all you people right now who are like editing videos on YouTube, we wouldn't be doing that if not for this movie, if not for George Lucas. If this movie didn't make George Lucas rich enough to start his own studio, the world as we know it right now would be so different. Digital filmmaking is only where it is right now because of this movie, because of Star Wars, the original Star Wars. And it is just a really great movie. It's one of the most imaginative movies of all time. So I'm putting it in the A rank. It definitely has the high ground. And next we have The Empire Strikes Back. And I know a lot of people will say that this is the best Star Wars movie ever, but like I said earlier, the original Star Wars is still my favorite. But I do love this movie very much. The Darth Vader father plot twist is still one of the biggest plot twists of all time in movie history. People still reference that plot twist all the time. And yeah, this is a movie that is really one for the history books. You know, in fact, all the original trilogy Star Wars movies are ones for the history books, you know. So yeah, The Empire Strikes Back also belongs on the high ground in the A rank.
I have the high ground!
Next, we have Return of the Jedi. So, of the three original trilogy movies, this one has to be the weakest, but it's still really good, and I'm putting it in the B rank. It is a fine addition to my collection.
A fine addition to my collection.
I know a lot of people hate the Ewoks, but I find them really hilarious, and then if you play Star Wars Battlefront 2, you can actually play as an Ewok, and I love that so much. Ewoks are awesome, and Luke Skywalker's green lightsaber is still one of my favorite lightsaber designs of all time, so yep, it is a fine addition to my collection. And next we have Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. So I know I have to stress this is a very subjective list, this is my personal ranking. I know a lot of people will disagree, and believe it or not, Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, to me, is a masterpiece. I know a lot of people will say this is the worst Star Wars movie of all time, but you have to understand, this is one of the first movies I ever watched in my life. I was a kid when I watched this movie when it came out in cinemas, and this movie changed my life. You know how the 1977 Star Wars movie changed a lot of kids' lives back then? This movie changed my life. If not for this movie, I probably wouldn't even have studied film, and I wouldn't be a filmmaker right now. So this movie has a really huge impact on my life, and believe it or not, it is my favorite Star Wars movie of all time. But just because it's my favorite movie, I still cannot say that it's better than The Empire Strikes Back and the original Star Wars A New Hope. So the film critic in me still has to be objective about this. So as much as I love this movie and I want to put it above everything else, I have to be honest with myself, and I know this is definitely not as good as the original Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back, but because I still really love it so much, I'm putting it here. It is still in the A rank, and it definitely still has the high ground.
I have the high ground!
Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. I really love this movie as well, but not as much as The Phantom Menace, because honestly, The Phantom Menace, the final battle scene, the Duel of the Fates, that is to me still the best duel in Star Wars history. Like, I like it even more than Revenge of the Sith's Anakin vs Obi-Wan duel. And because Episode 2, even though the Yoda and Count Dooku duel at the end was pretty epic, especially when I watched it when I was a kid, I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Seeing Yoda jump around like some crazy maniac. That was really hilarious and awesome. But I definitely cannot say that it's as good as Duel of the Fates, and this movie, as much as I love it, I don't feel it is as iconic as Episode 1 The Phantom Menace. Count Dooku, as much as I love him, he wasn't as badass as Darth Maul. So I am putting this in the B tier, a fine addition to my collection as well.
A fine addition to my collection.
And I'm ranking it after Return of the Jedi because I still think that Return of the Jedi is a better movie than Attack of the Clones. So within each rank, I am still ranking them based on which one I like more. But yeah, these 5 movies are all awesome. Alright, next we have Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. This one is easily an A tier movie. And I know people will get mad at me and say, how can you put it behind Phantom Menace? But like I said earlier, Phantom Menace shaped my life, so I'm very biased, so I'm putting Phantom Menace before Revenge of the Sith. But Revenge of the Sith is a genuinely awesome movie. Like, this is the prequel movie that even film critics who hated Episode 1 and 2, even they have to admit that Episode 3 was pretty good. And not to forget, a lot of the great memes in Star Wars really originate from Episode 3. So yeah, this movie is absolutely iconic and it is awesome and it will be a part of film history forever. And yes, it definitely belongs in the A tier. It definitely has the high ground.
I have the high ground!
And now, The Force Awakens. I know, especially after The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker, a lot of people started to think that, you know what, maybe The Force Awakens wasn't that good after all. But I actually really like The Force Awakens, and I'm putting it in the C tier. This is where the fun begins.
This is where the fun begins.
My main problem with The Force Awakens is that it didn't feel like it was anything new. It felt like a modern retelling of the original Star Wars. Like, it follows a lot of the same story beats as the original Star Wars A New Hope. So, you know, you can knock George Lucas all you want, but every single one of his Star Wars movies, like the 6 movies here, they are all completely different from one another, and you cannot say that he absolutely has zero creativity or originality because every single one of his movies, even though yes, they're inspired by like Japanese samurai movies, but they are all completely different from one another. And yeah, I'm just very happy that George Lucas doesn't make the same movie twice. So as much as I love The Force Awakens, even I, as a film critic, have to admit that it really just feels like a remake of A New Hope. So I'm putting it in the C rank. But I still think it is really enjoyable, and if you are a new Star Wars fan who has never watched any of the original 6 movies, and you feel that they're a bit dated, and you want to start with something more modern, then definitely start with The Force Awakens. I think that's a pretty good movie. However, now we come to The Last Jedi. And this movie is so controversial. Let me just say, this movie, I think it's a good science fiction movie, but as a big Star Wars fan, unfortunately I have to say it is a bad Star Wars movie. And because this is a Star Wars tier list, I have to put it in the F tier. Now, I have friends who are not Star Wars fans and they watched The Last Jedi and they actually liked the movie, and I can understand why, because I think if I wasn't a Star Wars fan, I would also like The Last Jedi, because honestly it is not a bad science fiction movie. I mean, some pretty stupid things happen in the movie, for sure. But overall, it was pretty fun. But my main issue with the movie is not so much about like issues with the narrative, like the narrative pacing being all out of whack. My main issue with this movie, honestly, is what they did to Luke Skywalker. Like, even up to this day, I don't understand how Luke Skywalker went from being literally one of the greatest heroes in cinema history in Return of the Jedi, someone who wouldn't even strike down his own father, who was like a dark lord of the evil Sith, but then he went from being this almost perfect hero to becoming this jaded old man who almost killed a kid because of a bad dream. Like, even just thinking about it, it seems pretty ridiculous, like that this character can become this character, you know? If they explained what happened in between the movies, it would make more sense. But because it just felt like Luke Skywalker's character just completely changed, and I really love Luke Skywalker, you know? I have the original Star Wars all the way up here on the A rank. And then when they did my boy dirty, I can't help it, man. Like, and it's not just me. I know a lot of people after The Last Jedi the Star Wars toy sales, the collectors, a lot of them left the market because they were really unhappy with what Disney did to Luke Skywalker. And I know a lot of people complain about Rey, but I actually really like Rey. I think Daisy Ridley is a really amazing actress, and I think she portrayed the character of Rey really well. So I have no issue with Rey at all. My only issue, the main issue with this movie, in fact I don't even mind Adam Driver as Kylo Ren. I actually like his character quite a bit. But my main issue is really what they did with Luke Skywalker. Like, I don't know how they managed to murder the character of one of the most beloved heroes in film history. And yeah, because of that, I have to put it down here in the F tier. But if you are not a Star Wars fan, I will actually say, like I said earlier, this is actually a pretty good science fiction movie. It just is a bad Star Wars movie to me. But like I said, this is all subjective, so maybe if you don't really care about Luke Skywalker, then it will be higher on your list. But for me, because I really love Luke Skywalker, this unfortunately has to be in the F tier, like a Bantha.
Like a Bantha.
And next we have The Rise of Skywalker. Where do I even begin with this movie? Is it a good movie? Heck no. Like, is it a good Star Wars movie? No. Is it a good movie? No. So unlike The Last Jedi, which was like a good science fiction movie but a bad Star Wars movie to me, this movie is both a bad Star Wars movie and a bad science fiction movie. But, as a Star Wars fan, there was quite a bit of fan service in this, and Jodie Comer played Daisy Ridley's Rey's mother in this movie, and I love her, so I might be a little bit biased, but I actually think with all the fan service, and they tried their best to redeem Luke Skywalker in this movie, but honestly the damage was already done from this movie. But because they tried to undo episode 8 with episode 9 with The Rise of Skywalker, I'm gonna put it above The Last Jedi. But don't get me wrong, I do not think it's one of the best Star Wars movies, so I'm still putting it in the F tier. It is like a Bantha.
Like a Bantha.
And let me just stress, even all these movies in the F tier, I do not think they are unwatchable. Like, even the worst movies on this whole list are still decent to me. Like, The Last Jedi is, as much as I hate what they did to Luke Skywalker, I still think it's like a 6 out of 10 movie. And The Rise of Skywalker as well, I give it 6 out of 10 as well. Just because they're down here doesn't mean you shouldn't watch them. And alright, back to the good stuff. Rogue One. My goodness, this movie is easily the best Disney Star Wars movie. And putting it in the A tier, it definitely has the high ground.
I have the high ground.
This movie has that amazing Darth Vader hallway fight scene that will go down in history as one of the best action scenes of all time. It is one of the most iconic Star Wars scenes of all time, and it's already been recreated twice since then. We had Luke Skywalker's epic hallway fight scene in Mandalorian Season 2, and then in Ahsoka recently we had the Baylan Skoll and Shin Hati hallway fight scene, which was also really epic. So yeah, this movie of all the Disney Star Wars movies, I feel is gonna be the most iconic one for years to come. And it is one of the few Disney Star Wars movies that everyone can agree is pretty great. So yeah, it deserves the A tier, it has a high ground. And I really love the final battle on Scarif. It was so beautiful. Plus Donnie Yen was awesome in this movie. Yeah, I really love this movie. And alright, let's move on to Solo, a Star Wars story. Now, I know a lot of people hate this movie. And I know a lot of people disagree with me, but I'm putting it in the D tier. There's always a bigger fish.
There's always a bigger fish.
Like, honestly, I do not think this is a bad movie at all. The problem with this movie is that it was a Han Solo prequel movie, and the main character didn't really feel like the Han Solo that we knew in the original trilogy. However, I really think this is actually a good movie. Like, believe it or not. Like, it's actually a really fun, simple action movie. It's like a solid 7 out of 10 movie to me. Plus, the Darth Maul appearance at the end, I'm just biased. I love that cameo so much. Plus, I think Emilia Clarke is really great in this movie. If they had just created a new character for this movie instead of making it a Han Solo prequel movie, I think this movie would have done so much better. But that being said, I do not feel that they murdered Han's character like they murdered Luke in The Last Jedi, so I'm still putting this in the D tier. Like, it is a simple, fun action movie. Is it anything amazing? No. But yeah, it's in the D tier. There's always a bigger fish. And next, we are moving on to the TV shows. We will start with 2003's Star Wars The Clone Wars. This one is awesome. I'm putting it in the B tier, a fine addition to my collection.
A fine addition to my collection.
So this is the one where we got to see General Grievous before he appeared in Revenge of the Sith. And if you can't tell, General Grievous is my favorite Star Wars character of all time. And I really love how he was portrayed in this show. Like, he's so badass in this show and he really just slaughters Jedi so easily. I really love how badass he is here. If you haven't seen those epic fight scenes of General Grievous fighting with the Jedi in this show, I think you should go on YouTube and search for some clips or something, or even better, go and watch the show itself. This show is really amazing. I'm putting it in the B tier, a fine addition to my collection. And next we have the last movie on this list before we move back to the TV shows. This is an animated movie, 2008's The Clone Wars. Unfortunately, as much as I loved the TV series, I think the movie was pretty bad. I have to put it in the E tier, twice the pride, double the fall.
Twice the pride, double the fall.
When this movie came out, everybody hated Ahsoka so much. This was the movie where they introduced Anakin's new apprentice, Ahsoka. And she went from being one of the most annoying characters to one of the most beloved characters right now. But at the start, when she was introduced in this show, nobody liked her at all. And this movie, honestly, overall was quite bad. So yes, I'm unfortunately gonna have to put it in the E tier. Which is a real shame because it was followed up by the Clone Wars TV series, which a lot of people I know didn't bother watching it because they thought it was gonna be as bad as the movie. But the Clone Wars TV series is freaking amazing, guys. I'm putting it in the S tier. Believe it or not, this is my favorite Star Wars show of all time. So I might be biased, but this is why it's going on the S tier for me. I watched this show when I was in the army, and this show pretty much saved or changed my life. And let me explain. This is a show about, well, the Clone Wars. You get to see what actual war looks like in Star Wars, and how the Jedi became like this army generals in this gigantic galactic conflict between the Republic and the Separatists. And because I was in the army at the time when I was watching this, and going through my own military training, it really rung home to me. There are some really deep themes and concepts introduced in this show that you don't really see in any of the other Star Wars shows at all. Like, what does it mean to be a peacekeeper? Is having the power to fight and win wars like the Jedi a good thing? Because sometimes we can get so caught up in fighting and winning that we abuse our power and suddenly we realize that maybe we aren't the good guys anymore. This show is filled with tons of deep and complex themes just like that, and it is most definitely not a cartoon just for kids. If you really like Star Wars at all, you must give the Clone Wars TV series a try. It is easily one of the best 3D animated TV shows of all time. And I don't just mean within Star Wars, I mean of all time, of like every single 3D animated TV show ever made in the history of television. I think this is easily one of the best. It definitely deserves to be in the S rank. It has unlimited power. Alright, and moving on, let's go to Star Wars Rebels. I will have to say, I think this belongs in... Yep, I'm gonna put it in the C tier, behind The Force Awakens. I really love Star Wars Rebels actually. Like, what they did with Darth Maul in this show is really great. Not as good as what they did with Darth Maul in Clone Wars, but he's still really good in this show. But unfortunately, this show doesn't have the awesome General Grievous like the Clone Wars, so there's no way it's gonna go up there. I really feel like the cast in this show was not as great as the cast in the Clone Wars, so yeah, the story, while still really good, I just don't feel it was as interesting as the Clone Wars. So, solid show, but a bit more kiddie than the Clone Wars, and I'm putting it in the C tier. I still think it's really good. This is where the fun begins.
This is where the fun begins.
And next we have Star Wars Resistance. Unfortunately, I'm gonna have to say this is, of all the shows on this list, I have to say this is probably the worst. And that's not to say that this is necessarily a bad show, but it is a really kiddie show. Like, if you're not a kid, I wouldn't recommend watching this show at all. Almost nothing happens in this show, nothing of significance happens in this show. But you know, it's not that offensive, like there's nothing really offensive about this show. They don't really like murder characters. It's just very kiddie, so I think if you're a kid, you might actually really like this show, but for me, I saw some of it and I didn't like it, so I'm gonna put it in the F tier. It is like a Bantha.
Like a Bantha.
And next we have The Bad Batch. I'm putting this in the C tier behind Star Wars Rebels. I don't think this show is that good compared to the Clone Wars. This is actually like a sequel to the Clone Wars, but the characters in here, like the Bad Batch, I don't know, man. Like, I mean, I like them, I like Omega as well, but I just feel like the story isn't as interesting as what it was in the Clone Wars. So overall, is it worth watching? Yes. That's why I still say it deserves to be on the C tier. This is where the fun begins.
This is where the fun begins.
But definitely not one of like the better shows up there, so I'm putting it in the C tier. Definitely still worth watching though, so yeah, give it a watch if you haven't already. Star Wars Visions. Now this is awesome. I'm putting it in the B tier, a fine addition to my collection.
A fine addition to my collection.
The reason why this isn't higher on the list is because I think some episodes in this show are amazing. Like every episode is a standalone, and some episodes are super awesome. Like there was one episode about the Sith infiltrating the Jedi and a Jedi hiding in a droid to escape from the Sith. The episode was awesome. I won't spoil it if you haven't already seen it. Although I guess I kind of just did. But yeah, if you know which episode I'm talking about, yeah, that episode was easily one of the best Star Wars episodes of all time. But yeah, because I feel the show is quite uneven, like some episodes are really amazing, like jaw-droppingly awesome, and then other episodes are not so good. So I have to kind of balance it out, and I'm giving it a B rank overall. I still think it is a fine addition to my collection. Alright, and next we have Tales of the Jedi. This show is awesome. I'm putting it above the 2003 Clone Wars. This is the show where you get to learn about Count Dooku's backstory, and Count Dooku is such an interesting character that I've always wanted to learn more of, and in this show you get to see how he turned to the dark side, and it is so great the way they did it. So for those of you who don't know, Qui-Gon Jinn, who died in episode 1, The Phantom Menace, was actually Count Dooku's Padawan. And in this show you get to see his reaction to his Padawan dying, which is one of the many things that pushed him over the edge to the dark side. And it is just so powerful, like so many scenes in this show are so powerful, and you really start to empathize with Count Dooku and understand why he turned to the dark side. And yeah, after watching this show, Count Dooku became one of my favorite Star Wars villains of all time. Like I already loved him before this, but this one really cemented his place in like my top 3 favorite Siths of all time. So yeah, this show is awesome. I'm putting it in the B tier, a fine addition to my collection.
A fine addition to my collection.
And next we have The Mandalorian. Now, if we are just talking about seasons 1 and 2, it will go up here. But unfortunately, season 3 was not that good. And because it is so uneven, I really love seasons 1 and 2, so it's still gonna be quite high. So I'm putting it behind Tales of the Jedi. On the B tier. It is still a fine addition to my collection.
A fine addition to my collection.
But yeah, it's really quite uneven. The first 2 seasons are awesome. Like season 2 especially at the end with the Luke Skywalker cameo. That was one of the best Star Wars scenes ever. But season 3, I still really enjoyed it, but it definitely was not as good as the first 2 seasons. So yeah, unfortunately this has to go into the middle of the B tier. I think Din Djarin and Grogu are still awesome no matter how bad the show gets, so yeah. The Mandalorian, even at its worst, is still pretty fun. Yep. Alright, and now with the Book of Boba Fett. This show was a big disappointment. I'm putting it... I would say it's better than the Clone Wars movie, so I'm putting it at the top of the E tier. Twice the pride, double the fall.
Twice the pride, double the fall.
Which is very suiting for this show. You know when they reintroduced Boba Fett in The Mandalorian Season 2, it was so awesome, and we thought that when they did the Book of Boba Fett, it would be more of that. But somehow, this show became super kiddie. There were the Vespa Rangers. We had the Vespa Rangers on their bikes. And then we had Boba Fett doing all sorts of ridiculous things. And yeah, it just felt so odd. But you know what? It did create a lot of memes, so it was pretty entertaining. So I'm not gonna put it in the F tier. and I still enjoyed it. So as stupid as it is most of the time, as silly as it is at the top of the E tier, like a Bantha.
Like a Bantha.
It is still better than a few of the other shows, for sure. And next we have Obi-Wan Kenobi. This show, I have to say, of all the shows on this list, this one has to be the biggest disappointment. Because I was expecting a 10 out of 10 show with this, I really wanted this show to be all the way up there. But I don't know, man. I really think Obi-Wan's character in this show wasn't that great. And the reason why this show was so disappointing to me is because I really wanted it to be like a real bridge between episode 3 and 4, and I really wanted some epic Obi-Wan lightsaber battles like episode 3. But unfortunately, he spends 90% of this show being like a depowered old man who can't even fight properly. Until the very, very end of the last episode when he fights Darth Vader, then he suddenly regains like all his force powers back. But otherwise, for the rest of the show, I don't know, man. I was not expecting this Obi-Wan Kenobi to be like that. I wanted more of episode 3, but what I got, it felt like more of Luke Skywalker in episode 8. So unfortunately, I don't think this show was that bad, so I'm still putting it in the D tier. Like, there were definitely good parts of it. But yeah, it really didn't feel that good, and I feel the Inquisitors were way better in Rebels than in Obi-Wan Kenobi, even though many of them were the same characters. So yeah, Obi-Wan Kenobi is in the D tier. There's always a bigger fish.
There's always a bigger fish.
Next we have Andor. My goodness, this show is absolutely amazing. I'm putting it in the A tier. I have the high ground.
I have the high ground!
This show really carries on the exact vibe and awesomeness of Rogue One. It's a prequel to Rogue One, and you know, when I watched Rogue One, originally I didn't really care about Andor, the character, Cassian Andor. But now, after watching this show, oh my goodness, Cassian Andor is one of my most favorite Star Wars characters of all time. And Biggs, who was not in Rogue One, but she's in this show, she's like Cassian Andor's, I guess, kind of love interest, I guess. She's amazing in this show. She's played by Adria Arjona, and she is easily one of my favorite female Star Wars characters of all time. She's super charismatic in this show, and I just love her character so much. Like, I know she wasn't that good in Morbius, but she's amazing in this show. So yeah, definitely watch this show just for Andor and Biggs, man. And the writing is actually really good also. Like, Andy Serkis, who was wasted as Snoke in the sequel trilogy, he's really great in this show, but he doesn't play Snoke here, he plays another character. But yeah, he's really good in this show. And I'm glad that he really got to do something great in Star Wars, you know, instead of just being relegated to dying randomly in The Last Jedi when he was playing Snoke. Like, his death in The Last Jedi was so anticlimactic, but his character, my goodness, his whole character arc, Andy Serkis, his character's arc in Andor was awesome. If you like a dark suspense thriller drama, Andor is the one for you. Like, it is like Rogue One, except in a full TV series. This is easily the most underrated Star Wars show ever. A lot of people haven't watched this, and I've been telling as many people as I can that they need to watch it. So yeah, if you haven't seen this, definitely watch it. It definitely has the high ground. And alright, for the final show, Ahsoka. Now, I actually really love this show, but I have to be objective here, and I'm gonna put it in the C tier. This is where the fun begins.
This is where the fun begins.
As much as I want to put it higher on this list, because don't get me wrong, I really love this show, I have to admit that the reason I love this show so much is because I love the Clone Wars so much, I love Rebels so much. You know, I've watched all these other shows like Mandalorian and the Clone Wars movie, and I know everything there is to know about Ahsoka. But for the casual audience who has only watched the Star Wars movies and never watched any of the TV shows, or even the Clone Wars movie, they've only seen Ahsoka in The Mandalorian, and they'll be so confused when they watch this show, because this show has so many references to the other shows that I feel you'll be lost if you didn't watch them. Like, it introduced so many characters from Star Wars Rebels into live action over here. But the people I talked to who didn't watch Rebels, they didn't care about the characters. Like, no one cares about Sabine or Ezra, apart from people like me who actually love those characters because we watched Rebels. And a lot of people found Ahsoka boring in this show because they weren't invested in her character like I was, because I really love her in the Clone Wars. So I can understand why the Ahsoka show doesn't really have that wide of a appeal to the large Star Wars audience, the casual Star Wars audience. But to the hardcore fans, this show is amazing. And I really love Baylan Skoll and Shin Hati, like they are so awesome in this show. But my main problem with this show, and my main reason after all I've said about how much I love this show, the reason why it's not high up on this list, is because I hate how the show ended. Like, there's so many unsolved questions, like what the heck was Thrawn loading onto his ship, like in all the caskets, what were those? And what exactly is going on with Baylan Skoll and Shin Hati? Like, there's so many unanswered questions and they just get stranded on that planet there. I mean, sorry, minor or major spoilers, but if you haven't already seen Ahsoka, I'm sorry for spoiling you. But yeah, at the end of the show, like the main characters get stranded on this alien planet where there are references to like the Mortis gods and all that, but I feel like they really left more questions than answers at the end, and I really much prefer it when TV shows, like each season has like its more definitive ending. Like there can still be loose threads to follow up in future seasons, but I feel like Ahsoka season 1 had way more questions than answers, which I really did not like. Like, even the Mandalorian, at the end of each season, they kind of wrap up the main storylines for that season. But in Ahsoka, so many of the main storylines did not even get a resolution. So yeah, it's a real shame, but Ahsoka is gonna be C tier for me. But I still really like it. And Shin Hati is awesome, so I'll still say this is where the fun begins. And yeah, that's my Star Wars tier list, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Once again, this is purely my opinion and is purely subjective, so please don't be angry with me if I put your favorite Star Wars movie at the bottom. Just as I understand, a lot of people would think that I'm crazy for putting Phantom Menace so high on my list, but I really love that movie. And yeah, thanks again for watching, everybody. May the Force be with you, and as always, stay gold. I'll see you all around.